His mouth opened in a silent scream. His body twitched, spasmed. Then stillness. Linash dropped to his knees beside the fallen Zephyrian, pressing his palm against his chest. He was checking for life, but the answer was already written across his dimming glow. A moment later he whispered, voice hollow, "His mind is gone." A terrible stillness settled over them. Ethan's breath came slow, shaky. The cold realization crept through him like a toxin. They had seen too much, and something within the chamber had taken notice. The bioship's alarms howled, a piercing, discordant wail that reverberated through the living walls. Ethan barely had time to process what was happening before the deep space transmission returned. Stronger, louder, incomprehensible. A voice with no words. A signal that burrowed through their ears and into their thoughts like an invading parasite. Kaelun's eyes widened, his body snapping to alert as his blade came fully unsheathed. It's not coming from the structure anymore. Javar turned toward the bioship's pulsating interface, his hands trembling as he scanned the incoming data. Something else is responding. Linash's glow dimmed to near darkness, his voice barely more than a whisper. They heard us. Then, impact. Sharp, concussive force slammed into the bioship, sending Ethan sprawling as the walls tensed and twisted as though in pain. The organic material rippled violently, the ship reacting like a wounded creature. Ethan felt it before he saw it. A presence. Moving. Not inside the ship. Outside, the Zephyrians froze. Their bioluminescence dimmed in unison, as if their very instincts told them to hide, to not be seen. No one breathed. Then, a shadow passed over them. A shape, massive and unknowable, broke through the void. It had no discernible body, no fixed form that Ethan's mind could register. A shifting mass of darkness, a presence that warped light, bent space around itself like a wound in the universe. It was not a ship, not a being. It was a distortion, a rip in the fabric of reality, and it was aware. The bioship shuddered violently as something latched onto them, not with physical arms or weapons, but with a force that Ethan could feel inside his skull. The deep space signal stopped. For a single, unbearable moment, there was only silence. Then, the transmission changed. The yow, incomprehensible distortion of sound shifted, focused. It became something clear. A voice. You opened the door. Ethan clutched his head, trying to drown out the voice, the whisper that wasn't really sound at all, but something deeper, something that pressed against his thoughts like 1,000 unseen hands pulling him apart. The overwhelming wrongness of what was happening settled into his bones. Reality itself felt thinner now. Javar's voice was hoarse, his glow pulsing with urgency. This is it. We have to close the chamber before it fully awakens. Kaelun's blade was already drawn, his form rigid. That will not be enough. Linash turned to Ethan, his glow frantic, desperate. Can you fight it? Ethan's mind was a battlefield. He could feel it now. The thing pressing against his thoughts, unraveling them, slipping into the spaces between what was once his own mind. His body felt less like his own. His thoughts were not alone. A single breath. Then, I don't know, he whispered. Then Kaelun did something Ethan never expected. The Zephyrian warrior stepped forward, blade in hand, planting himself between Ethan and the growing presence. Get out of here, he said. Linash's glow dimmed with confusion. What are you doing? Kaelun's voice was calm, steady, final. I will buy you time. Javar's gaze lowered, a rare hesitation in his posture. You don't have to do this. Kaelun's glow flickered, unshaken. Yes, I do. Ethan's chest tightened. Kaelun. The Zephyrian warrior turned toward him, his gaze piercing, his glow steady despite the storm closing in around them. You are not the monster they fear, human. You fight even when you are broken. That is why you must live. Then, before anyone could stop him, he turned and stepped into the dark. The ship trembled. The entity's presence rushed forward. A wave of something vast and impossible, roaring like a storm with no wind, a scream without sound. Lenash grabbed Ethan's arm. "We have to go. Now." Javar's hand slammed onto the chamber controls, activating the final sequence. The ancient door sealed shut, the glyphs glowing one last time before fading into nothing. The last thing Ethan heard before the ship's walls engulfed them in blinding light was Kayloon's voice shouting into the abyss. And then, silence. The walls hummed with recognition as Ethan stepped forward. The sound wasn't mechanical, nor was it natural. It was something in between, a resonance that wasn't heard so much as felt inside his skull. The chamber's interior wasn't built from stone or metal, nor was it something he could define in familiar terms. It was shifting, fluid, an ocean of thought given form. It pulsed, not with light, not with sound, but with awareness. And then, the D whisper returned. "We have spoken before." Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. The voice wasn't alien. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't even entirely separate from himself. It was there, inside his thoughts, as if it had always been waiting for him to remember. The presence pulsed, shifting through the chamber, formless yet undeniably real. Not a body, not a being, an idea, a concept given life. Lenash flinched beside him, his glow dimming to a weak, flickering gold. His voice was hushed, edged with something close to fear. "It knows you." Javar took a slow, deliberate step back. His bioluminescence flickered wildly, erratically, a swirling pattern of emotions Ethan couldn't begin to translate. This is not an entity. This is a cognitive infection. Ethan already knew, because the moment he heard its voice, the moment he understood it, something inside him shifted. Understanding was contagion. The knowledge wasn't just existing in the chamber anymore. It had begun to live inside him. A quiet, insidious realization crept into his bones. He had already learned too much. His breath hitched. He tried to pull back, tried to push it away, but the moment had passed. The knowledge had already taken root, and it wasn't letting go. The silence in the chamber was shattered by a single action. Javar moved. Ethan barely had time to react before the scientist's hands flew across the Zypherian interface, activating a rapid sequence of commands. The alien glyphs flared to life, pulsing with a frantic, unnatural rhythm. A low resonance built up, a hum that vibrated through the chamber, slithering up Ethan's spine like an electric charge. "What are you doing?" Lenash demanded, his glow flaring in alarm. Javar's bioluminescence pulsed erratically, shifting in patterns Ethan had never seen before. Desperation, conviction, a terrible kind of certainty. "We cannot leave this knowledge buried," Javar said, his voice trembling with both fear and desire. "We have to control it." Ethan's stomach twisted. He had seen this before. The symbols had shown him. "You don't understand. This isn't something you control." His voice was tight, urgent. "This thing doesn't want to be controlled." Javar's eyes snapped toward him, his expression dark with obsession. "It's not alive," he spat. "It's information. It's knowledge. And knowledge is power." The hum in the chamber grew into a deep vibration, making the walls tremble. The glyphs expanded outward, reshaping themselves, responding to Javar's touch like a living thing. The structure was responding. Kayloon's sacrifice had bought them time, but Javar was undoing it all. Lenash moved first, lunging forward, desperately trying to override the command. But Javar was faster. A surge of energy lashed out from the interface, an unseen force ripping through the air like a mental scream. Lenash cried out. Ethan barely caught him as he collapsed, his form convulsing, his glow erratic, pulsing in sharp, violent bursts. His mind had touched too much, had brushed against something he wasn't ready for. Ethan looked up, his breath ragged, his pulse hammering. Javar didn't look back. He had already made his choice. Ethan's body felt heavier. His arms, his legs. They no longer felt like his own. His mind wasn't just his anymore. He could feel it now. Valkther. The thought with no form, the whisper that had been waiting, the chamber was collapsing, not physically but mentally. Its boundaries unraveled, its structure dissolving as the infection spread, feeding on knowledge, on understanding. The more they knew, the stronger it became. Chavar was too far gone. The scientist was still desperately trying to force the structure open, still attempting to take what lay inside. Ethan knew what he had to do. He took a breath, the air thick with something wrong, something sentient, as if the chamber itself was aware of his choice before he even made it. He staggered forward, gripping the interface. A shudder ran through the structure. The whisper returned, curling inside his skull like a hand wrapping around his thoughts. "You cannot contain me," it murmured, almost amused. Ethan's fingers tightened against the glyphs, his jaw clenched. "But I can hold you." The chamber screamed. The walls twisted. Time, memory, and pain folded in on themselves as the knowledge poured into him. Valkther latched onto him, recognizing him as its new cage. Ethan's body convulsed, his breath stolen from his lungs as the weight of 1,000 forgotten voices crashed into him. Echoes of civilizations long dead, warnings that had gone unheard. Chavar collapsed. The scientist's glow flickered, empty, drained. He had tried to claim knowledge that was never meant to be understood, and it had taken everything from him. Linash, still weak, still struggling to stay upright, pulled himself up. He looked at Ethan, not just at him, but at what he had become. His voice was soft, but full of quiet horror. "Ethan, what have you done?" Ethan met his gaze, but it wasn't just him anymore, because now he could hear everything. The bioship's interior was silent when they returned. Not the silence of rest, not the silence of peace, the silence of something irreversibly broken. Linash and Chavar would not look at him. They didn't need to. They already knew. Ethan sat, staring at his hands. They looked the same. His skin, his fingers, the scars on his knuckles from years of work, of life, all the same. And yet, he wasn't. He could still hear Valkther's whispering. Not a voice, not words. Something deeper. A presence brushing through his thoughts, threading itself through his mind like roots digging into soil. It was there, settled deep in his consciousness, fused with his very being. He had taken it into himself, and it had never left. Chavar finally spoke, his voice colder than Ethan had. "Ever heard you are not supposed to survive?" The words cut deeper than Ethan expected. Slowly he turned to face him. "I had no choice." Chavar's bioluminescence dimmed, his glow pulsing in slow, unreadable waves. His next words were quiet, almost trembling. "You had every choice." His head lifted slightly, and for the first time Ethan saw something close to grief in his expression. "But now we can never go back to what we were before." Linash stood beside them, his glow softer, dimmer. There was no accusation in his voice, only sorrow. "I am sorry, Ethan." Ethan had no response. Because even now, even as the chamber was sealed, even as the knowledge was locked away from the universe once more, Valkther was still there, inside him, and it was waiting. The return to human space was uneventful. There were no celebrations, no welcoming committee, only silence. Ethan stood in the docking bay, staring through the viewport at Earth, the planet, that had once felt like home. Now it just seemed small, fragile. The transmission had already reached them. Earth's leaders had seen what happened, and they were afraid. The quarantine orders came immediately. There was no debate, no hesitation. Ethan was escorted from the ship in silence. The officers who guided him kept their distance. They didn't speak to him. They didn't meet his gaze. They wouldn't even look at him. Ethan felt the weight of the knowledge still pressing against his mind, a presence that was no longer separate from him. The whispers had never stopped. Valkther was still there. "They fear you," the voice murmured, slipping through his thoughts like a blade cutting through silk. "They should." Ethan's jaw clenched. He could still feel it. The knowledge. The fragments of a civilization long dead. A species that had tried to silence the whisper and failed. The infection had waited. And now, it had him. The doors to the holding cell sealed shut behind him, thick, reinforced, cold. It didn't matter. They thought walls could contain him. That distance would keep them safe. They didn't understand, because he was not alone, or at least, he should have been, and then, the whisper came again. "We are not done." Ethan smiled. The holding cell wasn't a cell, not in the traditional sense. It had no bars, no chains, just walls of reinforced steel, cold and sterile, humming faintly with the station's automated systems. This place had once been something. Elsa. A research station on the far side of Europa's frozen surface, where some of Earth's greatest minds had studied the possibility of alien life beneath the ice. Now, it had a singular purpose, keeping him contained. Ethan Carter sat in the dim glow of artificial lighting, his gaze fixed on the thick steel-reinforced door that sealed him inside. No locks, no guards, because they knew. There was no escape from himself. Beyond the reinforced windows, Jupiter loomed, an immense, swirling titan in the sky. Its storms raged in eternal silence, monstrous and unrelenting. The station was empty. No crew. No researchers. Just him and the whisper. They had left him here alone. Except, he wasn't alone. "You are thinking about the stars again." Ethan flinched, then exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. He was getting too used to the voice. It was no longer a separate presence, it was just there. "You wonder what it is like to return to them, to leave this small place." The whisper was neither threatening nor comforting. It simply was. "But you already know, don't you? You are not like them anymore." His hands clenched into fists. They thought they could isolate him, could keep him contained, like he was a problem that could be locked away, like he was the threat, but they didn't understand. He wasn't the one who needed to be contained. It was what was inside him. The whisper, the constant presence, unraveled his thoughts like silk, weaving through his mind, settling into the spaces where his own memories used to be. It did not invade. It did not consume. It simply spread. At first he had tried to resist, tried to push it back, tried to keep his own thoughts separate from it. But the truth was, he had already changed the moment he stepped into that chamber, the moment he heard the whisper for the first time, and no amount of distance, no prison of steel and stone, could stop it from growing inside him, from becoming part of him. "They will come back soon," the voice mused, distant but certain. "They are afraid of what you might become." Ethan leaned his head back against the cold wall, his lips curled slightly. They should be. The station had been silent for days. Ethan had counted them in his mind. The passage of time reduced to nothing but the slow cycles of artificial lighting and the distant unchanging storms of Jupiter beyond the glass. The outside world had cut him off, locked him away, sealed him beneath layers of steel and isolation, as if distance alone could contain what had already begun. Then, without warning, the signal returned. A single pulse, faint, subtle, but unmistakable. Ethan sat up slowly, his body still sluggish from days of waiting, from the emptiness of false solitude. He closed his eyes, expecting to hear the station's automated systems clicking to life, an alert from Earth, a response from the people who had abandoned him here. But it wasn't from them. It came from somewhere else. It pulsed again, a faint transmission cutting through the void, buried beneath layers of encryption. But Ethan didn't need decoding software to understand it. He felt it. The whisper inside him stirred, listening, waiting. A quiet hum of awareness spread through his mind, like the turning of a page in a book he had never read but had always known. And then, laughter, soft, amused. "Ah," Valkther whispered, its voice curling into his mind like smoke. "Something has noticed us." Ethan exhaled slowly, pushing himself up from his cot. He stepped forward, toward the observation window. Outside, Europa's endless ice fields stretched into the horizon, reflecting the cold blue of Jupiter's churning storms. But beyond that, past the edge of the relay satellites that still drifted in their lonely orbits, something moved. At first it was just a void, a ripple in space like a distortion, a bend in reality that had no cause, no source. Then, a shadow. Not a ship. Not a signal. Something else. Something that had been waiting. The whisper inside him grew, louder, hungrier. "It is time." Ethan's pulse slowed. His thoughts stretched outward beyond his body, beyond the small limits of human perception. He had fought against it, had tried to separate himself from it, had tried to remain human. But standing there now, watching the void shift, watching something awaken beyond the reaches of known space, he understood. For the first time since the chamber, he didn't feel like just one person anymore. He felt vast. The transmission pulsed again, stronger, clearer. The universe had finally answered back. Ethan smiled. The transmission had stopped. The station was silent again. But something had changed. Ethan sat in the darkness, his pulse slow, steady, unnaturally so. His mind stretched outward beyond the physical walls of his prison, beyond the reinforced steel meant to keep him contained. He could feel it now, something massive just beyond human perception. Jupiter's storms churned endlessly, a silent tempest raging for 1,000 years, a storm that had always been. And yet, for the first time, Ethan felt another storm approaching. Something was moving in the void. Not human, not Cypherian, something older. The whisper inside him deepened, turning from thought into presence. It no longer sat at the edges of his consciousness. It was part of him now. "Do you feel it?" Valkther's voice was no longer a distant echo. It was woven into him, into his being. Ethan exhaled, his breath fogging against the cold glass. "Yeah," he murmured. "I feel it." Outside, the stars did not move. But something beyond them did. "They are coming." And this time, the whisper wasn't just in his head. The station's sensors flickered violently, alarms blaring in silent warning. But it was too late. The response had already arrived. The first light broke through the void. Not from a ship, not from a weapon, but from something vast, something unbound by time, space, or human understanding. It wasn't light in the way humans perceived it. It was awareness, presence, arrival. Ethan should have felt fear. Every instinct, every human impulse should have told him to run, to hide, to fight. But he didn't, because he understood now. He had been preparing for this moment all along. His place in this grand equation of existence had already been decided, and he had accepted it. He took a slow step forward, the cold steel beneath his feet forgotten. His hand lifted, pressing gently against the icy glass of the viewport, where the void beyond had begun to shift, to reshape. The first shadow of the new era unfolded before him. "Are you ready?" Valkther's voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was his own. Ethan smiled. "I was always ready." And then, the stars blinked. The transmission pulsed one final time, and the universe answered. For a fraction of a second, everything stood still. The stars, so vast, so eternal, blinked, and in that instant the void was not empty. The pulse came again, but it was not just a signal anymore. It was a presence. It was acknowledgement. It was something answering back. Ethan's breath was slow, measured. His hand remained pressed against the viewport. His fingers splayed across the glass as if he could reach through it, touch the fabric of the moment itself. The station's systems flickered wildly, alarms, warnings, Power fluctuations. It didn't matter. Nothing in this place. Nothing on Europa, on Earth, in the fragile remnants of human space could stop what had already begun. This was not the end. It was the next step. Balkthar's voice was quiet now, settled within him, no longer a presence whispering from the edges of his thoughts, but something woven into his very existence. They see you now. Ethan's lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. I see them too. And then, the transmission surged. A final pulse. A final confirmation. And the universe opened its doors. The stars were different here. Ethan Carter stood at the observation deck, hands clasped behind his back, eyes locked on the abyss beyond the reinforced glass. The distant glow of a dying red dwarf illuminated the vastness, casting flickering shadows over the diplomatic vessel's hull. This was the neutral zone, the space where humanity's cautious hand extended toward the unknown. His breath hitched as the Zypherian bioship emerged from the void, a shape that defied earthly engineering. It pulsed like a living organism, its translucent surface shifting in waves of bioluminescent color, responding to unseen stimuli. It was no vessel of steel or circuitry. It was alive. Approach sequence initiated, the pilot announced. Ethan felt the faint hum of thrusters as their diplomatic craft aligned with the alien ship's entrance. The docking umbilical extended, latching onto the bioship's gelatinous surface, which reacted as though it could feel their presence. This was it. The first true meeting of minds. Humanity had fought wars to reach the stars, but diplomacy with the unknown was its greatest battle yet. The airlock decompressed with a soft hiss. Ethan exhaled, stepped forward, and walked into the living unknown. The interior of the Zypherian bioship was unsettling. The walls pulsed, their surfaces shifting like translucent veins under skin. There was no metal, no panels, just organic corridors twisting in unnatural symmetry. And then, they emerged. 3 figures stood at the far end of the chamber, their elongated forms shimmering under the bioship's dim ambient glow. Their skin, a strange amalgamation of obsidian and sapphire, flickered with shifting bioluminescent patterns, as though their thoughts were written into the very texture of their flesh. The one in the center stepped forward first. You are Ethan Carter. The words did not come from its mouth. They formed in his mind unbidden, a ripple through his consciousness. Ethan stiffened. He had expected a universal translator, perhaps a gesture-based language, but this was direct, intimate. The alien inclined its head. Jiber. A pause. Then, another stepped forward, taller, more rigid in posture. Its form shifted into deep crimson hues. Kaloon, it projected, but the sensation behind its name was different. Where Shavar had been measured curiosity, Kaloon's mind felt like a blade, sharp and mistrusting. Finally, the last one approached, its glow warm and vibrant, shifting to hues reminiscent of an Earth sunset. Lee Nash. We welcome you, human. Unlike the others, there was no hesitation, no underlying judgment. If anything, Ethan felt something unexpected. Hope. He nodded, feeling the weight of centuries of human history behind this single moment. First contact had begun. Ethan followed the Zypherians through the bioship's corridors until they reached a viewing chamber. The organic walls peeled back in a slow, deliberate motion, revealing the structure that had drawn both species here. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Suspended in the void beyond the bioship was a titanic construct, a monolithic remnant of something ancient, its surface marked with runes that glowed with unnatural energy. It floated in defiance of physics, a forgotten relic orbiting a star that should have died eons ago. What is this? Ethan whispered, barely realizing he had spoken aloud. Shavar's mind pressed against his, a sensation like a cold ripple over his skull. A relic, older than us, older than you. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Who built it? Kaloon's colors darkened. His response carried a weight of memory, a burden that even across species, Ethan could recognize as fear. Question with no answer. The chamber pulsed with dim blue light as Ethan sat across from the Zypherians, a strange circular device between them, seemingly grown from the very structure of the ship. "This is how you communicate?" he asked, eyeing the organic mechanism warily. Linash nodded, placing a three-fingered hand onto the interface. Ethan hesitated before doing the same. The surface was warm, too warm, like living flesh. And then, a tidal wave of sensation crashed into him. Ethan gasped as his mind stretched beyond itself. Thoughts, colors, emotions not his own flooded his senses. Words had taste, sounds had shape. Emotions became tangible textures brushing against his very essence. Javar's thoughts coiled cautiously, analyzing him with an intensity that felt surgical. Kayloon's presence was hard, unyielding, distrustful. But Linash's mind welcomed him, softened the overwhelming weight of the interface. "You see now, human." Linash's voice resonated through the connection. "We do not speak. We feel. We become." Ethan had no words. The experience was both terrifying and exhilarating. But something else stirred in the connection. Something beneath the shared thoughts. Something watching. The Zypherians recoiled suddenly, their bioluminescence flickering erratically. Ethan snapped his head up, his own mind still adjusting from the neural flood. "What?" A low vibration trembled through the ship, a deep resonance that came not from the bioship, but from the ancient structure beyond. Javar and Kayloon exchanged a glance. They knew. Ethan's body went cold. "What aren't you telling me?" Javar hesitated, then in a voice devoid of its prior confidence, "You should not be here." Before Ethan could demand an explanation, the resonance grew stronger. A tremor rippled through the ship, and then the whisper came. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't even a thought. It was a presence pressing against the edges of Ethan's mind, slipping through the cracks of consciousness. "You have come too late." Pain lanced through Ethan's skull. His vision blurred. The world tilted. Then, darkness. The Zypherians had tried. Again and again their elongated hands traced the symbols etched onto the sealed chamber door, but the structure rejected them each time. The glyphs remained cold, lifeless, indifferent. Javar pressed his fingers to the alien carvings once more, his bioluminescence dimming in frustration. His touch lingered for a moment longer, as though willing the door to respond. It did not. Kayloon exhaled sharply, stepping back, his posture rigid, his deep crimson glow flickering with irritation. "It does not recognize us," he stated. Linash tilted his head toward Ethan, his soft amber hues shifting with thought. Perhaps it was never meant to. Ethan felt a strange sensation creep through him, a nervous energy, a sense of inevitability. He wasn't a scientist, he wasn't an engineer. He was a linguist, a researcher, an observer. He had spent his career deciphering the past, not becoming part of it. And yet, something deep inside him, something instinctual, ancient, familiar, compelled him forward. His hand met the glyphs. The reaction was immediate. A low hum vibrated through the chamber walls, the alien carvings flaring to life, their energy pulsing, not with the cold, distant blue of the Zypherians, but something warmer. Something human. Kayloon stiffened, his glow deepening into shadow. This is not coincidence. Javar's uncertainty flickered across his form, hesitant yet unwilling to ignore the truth. Or perhaps it is fate. Ethan swallowed hard. Why him? His mind raced, but the answer no longer mattered. The door was opening, and whatever waited inside had been waiting for him. He glanced back. Linash nodded. Javar hesitated. Kayloon did not move. Ethan stepped forward. The chamber was wrong. The moment Ethan stepped inside, he felt it, a quiet, creeping sense of displacement, as if the space itself did not belong in this reality. His breath hitched as his eyes adjusted to the walls. They were covered in symbols, but they refused to stay still. Each time he tried to focus, they shifted, rearranging themselves into new, indecipherable forms. "This writing," Ethan murmured, taking an uneasy step forward. "It's alive." Lanash traced his fingers lightly over the nearest carvings, his glow flickering with what could only be reverence or fear. "We call it the language of the dead." Ethan barely had time to process the words before the symbols pulsed, not with light but with something deeper, something older, something that remembered. A wave of images crashed into his mind, a city swallowed by fire, a civilization screaming in a language he almost understood, structures collapsing into dust, beings clawing at their skulls, their thoughts unraveling like silk, and in the center of it all, something shifting, consuming knowledge, feeding on understanding itself. Ethan staggered back, heart hammering. What the hell was that? Shavar's voice was cold, calculated. A warning. Ethan exhaled shakily, trying to steady himself, but something still lingered at the edge of his thoughts. Not the memory itself. Something missing. A gap. A deliberate absence. He turned to Lanash, his voice quieter now. "These memories, they're incomplete." Lanash's glow dimmed, his expression unreadable. Something has been erased. A chilling realization settled over Ethan. Someone had tried to forget, and yet the chamber had not forgotten him. The silence in the chamber was thick, charged with something dangerous, unspoken. Kaloon's glow deepened into burning crimson, his form rigid as he glared at Ethan. "This knowledge does not belong to you." His voice was low but sharp, edged with something deeper than anger, something like fear. Ethan turned, his jaw tightening. "I didn't ask for it." Shavar's glow shifted uneasily, flickering between hesitation and analysis. "But it responds to you," he countered. "That cannot be ignored." Ethan exhaled sharply, stepping back, his hands raised in frustration. "Look, I didn't build this thing. You think I planned this?" Kaloon took a slow step forward, his towering form casting a shadow across Ethan. "Humans take." His voice was measured, deliberate, but his glow pulsed dangerously. "And take. And take." Ethan's fists clenched. "That's not fair. I'm here because we want to learn." Kaloon's laughter was bitter, hollow. "Learn?" His glow darkened further. "Is that what your species calls it? When you strip the stars? Fair? When you dig up the past without understanding what you awaken?" Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but Lanash moved between them, his glow shifting to soothing golden hues. "Enough," Lanash said, his voice steady. "None of us expected this, but we cannot deny what is happening." Shavar sighed, rubbing his temples, his light dimming with exhaustion. "We must proceed cautiously. If the structure responds to Ethan, then we use him as our guide." His gaze hardened. "But we must all agree. If what lies ahead is too dangerous, we seal it. Forever." Kaloon said nothing, but the shadows flickering within his glow told Ethan this wasn't over. Ethan couldn't sleep. The bioship's walls pulsed faintly, a slow rhythmic glow responding to unseen stimuli. The living vessel was aware, reacting to something beyond sight, beyond sound. But Ethan's mind was not here. It was still inside the chamber, still with those symbols that felt like they were watching him. He closed his eyes, willing himself to rest. It didn't work. The moment his consciousness drifted, the visions returned. Fire, a sky torn apart, rifts of light bleeding into a darkness too deep to comprehend. Figures below screamed in terror, speaking a language he almost understood, but the meaning was just out of reach, as if his mind refused to translate it. Then, movement. Not a person, not a being. Something shifting within the fire, untouched by the destruction it had caused. It had no face, no voice. And yet, He could feel its presence, its intention, its hunger. Not a creature, not a god, a concept, a thought given form. Ethan's body seized. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His mind was drowning in something vast, something old. And then, a whisper. It waits. His eyes snapped open as he shot upright, gasping for air. His body was soaked in sweat, his pulse hammering against his ribs. But the cold dread settling into his bones had nothing to do with the dream. The Zephyrians were wrong. This wasn't just history. It was still here. The moment Ethan stepped into the chamber the next day, he knew something had changed. The air felt heavier, charged with an unseen energy. The walls were humming, vibrating with a slow, eerie pulse, as if something beneath the surface had begun to stir. And the glyphs, they burned. No longer cold and lifeless, they now pulsed with an unsettling heat, their shifting patterns faster, sharper, as if they were trying to communicate something urgent. Linash's glow flickered with uncertainty, caution. It's active. Javar swallowed, his fingers twitching as he examined the accelerating patterns. That should not be possible. Kaelun's stance was rigid, his blade already half drawn. We leave. Now. But Ethan didn't move. He couldn't. There was a pull now, something tugging at his mind, guiding him forward. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, to run. But he couldn't. His feet carried him toward the glyphs. His breath slowed, his hand rose, and then, contact. The moment his fingers brushed the final glyph, the entire chamber shuddered. The air grew thick, pressing against his lungs like an unseen weight. The walls brightened, their glow shifting from warmth to something unnatural. Then, a whisper, stronger now. You have come too late. A surge of cold, violent awareness slammed into Ethan's mind. The knowledge poured into him, raw and unchecked, unraveling the boundaries of what he had once been. Something inside the structure had been waiting, and now, it was awake. The bioship screamed. The walls convulsed violently, their once fluid glow now flickering erratically, pulsating as though something had been disturbed deep within its living core. The corridors trembled, sending waves of motion rippling through the organic veins of the ship. It wasn't just the chamber that had reacted. The entire vessel was in distress. Ethan barely managed to stay on his feet, grabbing onto the nearest solid surface for balance. The vibrations rattled through his bones, setting his teeth on edge. What the hell is happening? He shouted over the deafening resonance, his voice barely audible above the groan of the bioship. Linash stood frozen, his bioluminescence flickering wildly, shifting in waves of fear. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. The structure is reacting. Javar pressed his palms against the chamber's interior, his glow dim and erratic. Ethan watched in horror as the glyphs, those impossible shifting symbols, began to spread. They unraveled, splitting apart and reforming into grotesque new shapes. Meanings warped, shifting faster than the eye could follow, entire segments rewriting themselves before Ethan could even begin to comprehend their intent. Javar's voice cracked as he whispered, "The cognitive field is expanding. It's rewriting itself." Ethan barely heard him. His head was splitting open. Thoughts that were not his own tore through his mind like a tidal wave. The visions returned. But this time, they weren't fragmented, weren't fleeting. They were clear. Civilization crumbling beneath skies of unnatural fire. Beings tearing at their own skin, clawing at their skulls as something inside them screamed to be free. Cities consumed not by war, not by weapons, but by knowledge itself, by something that had spread through thought alone. Ethan gasped, stumbling back as his own name appeared, among the glyphs. The symbols did not just shift now, they spoke, and Ethan understood. It had been waiting for him. Kaelun drew his blade, the curved edge gleaming under the pulsating glow of the chamber. His crimson bioluminescence flared like wildfire, his muscles taut with barely contained fury. "We must leave. Now." The force of his words cut through the tension like a blade. but no one moved. Javar didn't respond immediately. His fingers hovered over the shifting glyphs, twitching slightly, caught between the scientist's hunger for knowledge and the creeping dread curling around them all. Lenash, however, had his gaze fixed solely on Ethan. "You saw it, didn't you?" His glow was dim, uncertain. Not fearful, not yet, but close. Ethan barely registered the question. His head pounded, his mind still reeling from the surge of alien memories clawing at his consciousness. He swallowed against the nausea, pressing a trembling hand to his temple. "It wasn't just a war," he whispered, his own voice sounding distant, disconnected. "It was an infection." Keylun growled, his entire form rippling with barely contained fury. "This is exactly why we should not be here." Javar finally exhaled, the flickering pattern of his glow betraying his uncertainty. He turned toward Keylun, his voice measured but not without conflict. "But what if the knowledge here is the key to survival?" Keylun's eyes darkened, his glow deepening into something dangerous. "You want survival?" he said, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "Then stop thinking like a scholar and start thinking like someone who wants to live." The tension in the room became palpable, thick enough to suffocate. Lenash hesitated before looking at Ethan. His voice was softer, but it carried weight. "And you? What do you believe?" Ethan clenched his fists. His thoughts felt too vast, stretching beyond him. The knowledge inside the chamber unfolding like a cancer, weaving into his mind. Every rational part of him screamed to run, to leave this place and never look back. But something deep, something human, refused to let go. He looked up, meeting their gazes. "We have to know," he said at last. "If this happened before, it can happen again. We have to understand what we're dealing with." Keylun let out a slow breath, then shook his head. "You just made a terrible mistake." Ethan stumbled, his vision blurring at the edges, his thoughts twisting into knots that weren't his own. A presence coiled within his mind, unseen but impossibly heavy, pressing against his thoughts, whispering, in 1,000 voices that were not his own. He fought to hold on to himself, but the more he struggled, the more his mind slipped. Memories fractured, his childhood, his mother's voice. The first time he looked up at the stars and dreamed of being among them, gone. A moment later they came back, but wrong, familiar, yet distant, like they belonged to someone else. His pulse pounded. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to speak. "It's in my head." Lenash's hands grabbed his arms, his glow frantic, shifting between hues of concern and panic. "Stay with me, Ethan." Javar's voice came as a distant echo, as though Ethan was hearing him from another time, another body. "This structure does not just contain information." There was a pause, heavy and damning. "It consumes it." Keylun let out a low, frustrated curse, his blade half drawn, as if he could cut the infection out of the air. "The more we learn, the worse it gets." Then, a strangled cry. The sound ripped through the air like tearing fabric, cutting through the growing madness. They all turned at once. One of the Zyphirian guards convulsed violently, his elongated form writhing on the ground. His bioluminescence flared erratically, colors shifting too fast, too bright, too wrong.